Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to spend my contribution largely speaking about food and drink and perhaps a word or two about education. And of course, in the food and drink area, we're doing very well with the powers that we are. We're progressing with the powers that we have. I will, of course, say more that we could do had we more. But I can't move into food and drink, which are largely export-led successes, without picking up the specific thing that Ian Gray said, free access to the widest possible market, and the contribution from Mr Rennie, which made similar reference to the £45 billion trade that we have with the rest of the UK. The threat, of course, to our export industries lies entirely with Westminster, who wish to disconnect us from the over 400 million market that there is in the EU. And indeed, if anyone's in the business of erecting barriers, it is at UK level that we have that threat that would take us out of the EU and create the barriers that would create difficulty. I'm going to develop my point a little bit further, if I may. But why do we do so well with food and drink in the world? We have some of the powers that enable us to help our industry, and that's good. But fundamentally, it depends on Scotland's reputation in the world, people knowing about Scotland, people believing that Scotland is an environmentally good place to buy their food and their drink from. They do that because of successive governments' attention to this subject. We have a clear, clean environment. We know that in Scotland our waters are pristine. We know that our land is free from the contamination from GM crops. And this government has been very clear that it wants to sustain that. Our products, of course, have been going around the world for a very long time. The Liberals once did something useful for the Scotch whisky industry in 1915 when the Immature Spirits Act was passed by Lloyd George as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Mind you, the Act was drafted by his official, James Stevenson. Yes, he was a relative, of course. And that dramatically improved the position of the malt whisky industry in Scotland. So successful is Scotland's whisky industry, of course, that you can't go to India without seeing evidence of the recycling of Johnnie Walker bottles to be filled with local hooch. You go to Nepal and you will see a brand which is famously very similar in its appearance called Cat 69 rather than perhaps VAT 69. Around the world, our successes are copied. But of course what's happened under this government's watch as well has been moves to geographically protect a wider range of our products. Examples of that, the Arbroath Smoky, and most recently the Stornoway Black Pudding. Fine examples of Scottish food and drink products. And of course, our salmon fishing industry, farming industry, now the third biggest in the world, is exporting to the Far East, where the product is in huge demand. The first product to have Label Rouge in France. But there are threats to our success in food and drink. Most notably, we're unable to engage in the most effective way on the issues that come from the Faroes and Iceland's abrogation of pelagic fisheries to them. That is a very serious threat to an economically important industry and, of course, threatens marine stewardship designations. And, of course, it's slightly ironic. When I went to Iceland in 1973, the Icelanders had just declared the 200-mile limit to protect the fish that was in their area from the exploitation, which I'm afraid they are now guilty of. But, of course, as we are not internationally represented in a meaningful way, we are not able to engage to the extent that would enable us to protect our markets to the maximum possible extent. Education, too. Remember that we in Scotland had 4 universities for hundreds of years, while England merely had 2. Our students went all over Europe and all over the world. Today, we export our education, often by satellites around the world from our universities, and increasingly by providing online courses. And I very much welcome that the knowledge, experience and pedagogical technological achievements of our universities are now reflected in the internet world, earning new revenue for Scotland. Presiding Officer, in my last minute, I just want to pick up one or two further things. Slovakia was referenced earlier. Strangely enough, at a 10% per annum growth rate, I don't think the Slovakian people are immediately queuing up to change their constitutional status after their independence around the world. Now, the Scots, in particular, let me just say, are not people who are put off by barriers in any event. My great-great-grandfather applied for his passport in 1853 to emigrate to Canada, and today I have living relatives in Canada, the USA, New Zealand, Australia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, all the countries of the British Isles and beyond. Somebody's encouraging me to join them, Presiding Officer, but I think I will refuse to accept that invitation and conclude my remarks on that.
Presiding Officer.